In 1206, a man named Temujin became Genghis Khan and built an empire so vast that some historians argue its conquests measurably changed the Earth's atmosphere. Within decades, his empire grew into the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching across a landscape no single ruler had ever controlled before. Understanding how that happened means starting with a boy who had almost nothing. Somewhere around 1162, near the Onon River, on the Mongolian steppe, Temujin was born, though historians can't agree on the exact year, with some sources placing his birth as early as 1155 and others as late as 1167. What nobody disputes is loss defined his early years. His father, Yesugei, a minor tribal chief, was poisoned by rival Tatars while Temujin was still a child, and with their protector gone, the family found itself abandoned by its own clan, left to scrape by on the open steppe in poverty. Years later, a rival tribe kidnapped his wife Borte, and Temujin's response, gathering allies to bring her back, is the moment historians frequently point to as the turning point, where a struggling outcast began building the alliances that would eventually make him unstoppable. None of it happened fast. Rival leaders fell one by one, including a former friend turned enemy named Jamuka, and power consolidated slowly across a landscape of competing tribes who'd spent generations fighting each other instead of anyone else. Much of what we know about these early years comes from the secret history of the Mongols, the oldest surviving Mongolian literary work, and one of the primary sources historians rely on for this period, though its accounts blend documented events with later mythologizing. That fighting stopped in 1206. At a tribal council called a Kurultai, the Mongol and Turkic Mongol tribes came together under a single leader, and Temujin walked away with a new name, Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. The empire that would eventually stretch from the Pacific to the edge of Europe had just been founded by a man who spent his childhood with nothing at all. Size alone doesn't capture what Genghis Khan built. It became the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen, reaching from the Sea of Japan in the east to the edges of Eastern Europe in the west, and stretching from Siberia down to the Persian Gulf. Historians genuinely disagree on the exact footprint, with estimates ranging from roughly 9 million to over 12 million square miles, depending on the source and which peak year gets used, and even the low end of that range dwarfs anything that came before it. Some historians estimate the empire ruled over roughly a quarter of the entire world's population at its height. So how did a population of steppe herders pull off conquest on that scale? The answer comes down to two technologies working together: horses and the Mongol composite bow. The composite bow, built from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, gave Mongol cavalry a weapon they could fire accurately at full gallop and at ranges that outmatched most opposing archers, combined with a mobility advantage that saw Mongol cavalry reportedly covering 60 to 100 miles in a single day. No settled agricultural civilization of the era could match them, let alone see them coming. Behind the tactics was a man many military historians consider the most capable general the Mongol Empire produced, Subutai. A commoner who rose through Genghis Khan's meritocratic command structure, Subutai planned and executed campaigns across more territory than any other commander of the medieval world, including the devastating sweep through Russia and into Eastern Europe. When people ask how the Mongols could project force so far from the steppe, the honest answer usually involves Subutai somewhere near the center of the explanation. The conquests started close to home and expanded outward with startling speed. The Western Xia kingdom fell first, targeted between 1209 and 1210, and the Jin dynasty in northern China came next, fought from 1211 to 1215. By 1215, the Jin capital, then called Zhongdu, had fallen, the city known today as Beijing. Central Asia came under assault next. Between 1218 and 1221, the Mongols destroyed the Khwarazmian Empire in a campaign reportedly triggered when Khwarazmian officials killed Mongol envoys and merchants, and major cities including Samarkand and Bukhara, suffered devastation on a scale historians describe as catastrophic, though exact casualty figures from this specific campaign never made it into reliable surviving records. Genghis Khan died in 1227 during a continued campaign against the Western Xia, and the exact cause remains unconfirmed to this day. Some accounts point to illness, others to injury, and historians have never reached consensus on which version is correct. Even his burial location stays unresolved. His tomb has never been found, and Mongol tradition surrounding it appears to have been deliberately secretive. The empire kept expanding anyway. Ogedei Khan, his third son, took over in 1229 and established Karakorum as the empire's administrative capital on the Mongolian steppe, giving the vast empire a fixed center for governance and coordination for the first time. Under Ogedei's direction, forces pushed into Russia, Poland, and Hungary between 1235 and 1242. That European campaign was led by Batu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, who would go on to found the Golden Horde, with Subutai providing the strategic planning. Their forces reached as far as the outskirts of Vienna before pulling back, reportedly because Ogedei Khan had died and Mongol leaders needed to return home for succession councils. Baghdad fell in 1258, sacked by forces under Hulagu Khan, and the destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate's capital, along with the killing of the last Abbasid caliph, marks what many historians consider the symbolic end of the Islamic Golden Age. Casualty estimates for the siege swing wildly across different historical sources, and no scholarly consensus exists on an exact number. 2 years later, the seemingly unstoppable Mongol advance hit its first real wall. Mamluk forces defeated the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 in what is now Israel and Palestine, marking the first significant halt to westward expansion. China, meanwhile, saw its own transformation. Kublai Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, established the Yuan dynasty in 1271, ruling as a Mongol-led imperial dynasty over the country itself. Not every campaign succeeded, though. Typhoons reportedly destroyed Mongol invasion fleets sent against Japan in both 1274 and 1281. Storms significant enough to give rise to the Japanese term kamikaze, meaning divine wind. This is where the story gets harder to pin down with precision, and where honesty matters more than a dramatic number. Death toll estimates from Mongol conquests swing enormously, from roughly 20 million on the low end to over 40 million, and some historians cite figures as high as 60 million across the full span of military campaigns. 10%, that's the portion of the entire world's population some estimates suggest Mongol conquests may have killed. These numbers were never settled, and they still aren't. Mongol accounts sometimes emphasize their own destructive power as a deterrent against future resistance, while chroniclers from conquered populations had their own cultural and religious reasons to record catastrophic losses, which means modern historians keep debating where the real figures likely fall within that wide range. One claim in particular deserves a direct warning label. Some researchers argue that Mongol-caused depopulation, especially across farmland in China and Central Asia, allowed enough forest regrowth to measurably affect global atmospheric carbon levels in the 13th century, an idea that spread widely through popular media but remains genuinely contested among climate historians, and it shouldn't be treated as settled science. What isn't in dispute is the scale of destruction across these campaigns, even if the exact numbers will probably never be fully known. A simpler story would end with conquest and devastation alone. This one doesn't. Historians call the period of relative stability that followed peak Mongol expansion the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. And under this system, trade along the Silk Road grew dramatically safer and more active than it had been in centuries, linking East Asia to Europe and the Middle East in ways that had previously carried far more risk. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant, traveled extensively through Mongol territory during this stretch, spending time at Kublai Khan's court in what had by then become a sophisticated imperial center, and his written accounts remain some of the most cited Western sources on the Mongol world, even though historians have questioned parts of his narrative over the centuries. Religious tolerance stood out as another Mongol trademark. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, including Nestorian Christian communities that had spread across Central Asia, and practitioners of other faiths generally worshipped freely across Mongol territory, and religious leaders frequently got exempted from taxation, an unusual policy for an empire built this heavily on military conquest. Managing territory this vast required serious infrastructure, and the Mongols delivered it through the Yam system, a relay network of horse messenger stations that moved information and officials across the empire at speeds unmatched in that part of the world until the telegraph arrived centuries later. Genghis Khan gets credit for commissioning a written script for the Mongolian language, adapted from Uyghur script, and for codifying Mongol law into a legal code called the Yasa, though the complete original text never survived, which means most of what historians know about its actual content comes from secondary references rather than the document itself. No single battle or single year ended the Mongol Empire. It fractured slowly instead, largely following Mongol Khan's death in 1259, splitting into four major khanates: the Golden Horde across Russia and Eastern Europe, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Il Khanate across Persia and the Middle East, and the Yuan dynasty in China. These khanates ran with real independence from each other, and at times they fought each other directly, which undercuts the idea of a single, unified Mongol Empire for most of its later existence. Several forces drove the long decline. Succession disputes kept triggering internal conflict between Khanate branches, and governing territory this vast, with 13th century tools of communication and administration, created constant strain that never really eased. The Black Death made things worse. Some historians believe the plague that devastated populations across Asia and Europe in the 14th century spread partly along the same trade routes Mongol control had made safer, striking the Mongols' own territories right alongside everyone else's. Mongol rulers themselves changed too, gradually blending into the cultures they governed, and Kublai Khan's successors in China increasingly adopted Chinese imperial customs, which slowly wore down the distinct Mongol identity that had driven the original conquests in the first place. The Ming dynasty overthrew the Yuan dynasty in 1368, formally ending Mongol rule in China, while the Golden Horde held on in reduced form across parts of Russia and Central Asia into the 15th and 16th centuries before fully fragmenting, its remnants eventually absorbed by the expanding Russian state. Historians have told this story two very different ways. For centuries, the dominant version came from Persian and Chinese chronicles, written by populations who suffered under Mongol conquest, and it portrayed Genghis Khan and his empire primarily as an engine of devastation. That framing wasn't wrong. The destruction was real. But a more complex picture has gained ground since the late 20th century, one that emphasizes Mongol contributions to global trade integration, religious tolerance, and administrative innovation across an empire that connected more of the world than any before it. And this revisionist framing has faced its own pushback from academic historians who argue it sometimes overstates the positive legacy. Both readings rest on real evidence. Neither one captures the whole picture alone. Here's what stays certain. In 1206, a man who'd lost his father to poison and his wife to kidnapping stood before a tribal council and became Genghis Khan. And within his lifetime and the decades that followed, his empire reshaped more of the world than almost any single political entity before it, through both destruction and connection in equal measure. Whether that legacy deserves to be remembered primarily for what it destroyed or what it built remains a question historians are still arguing over. That argument itself might be the most honest thing anyone can say about the Mongol Empire. The story was never simple, and even now, it hasn't fully settled.